You're listening to What Ray's Saying, the podcast. You know, the concept of race in humans has no basis in science, but this social and cultural construct is what we've been left to deal with for thousands of years, and it frames our descriptions and classifications of other humans with pseudo-logic or made-up reasoning or no damn reasoning at all. No foundation at all other than personal experience. You remember that story of Rachel Dolezal, that white woman and former president of the Spokane, Washington NAACP chapter, who portrayed herself as a black woman? Yeah, that story has been out of the news cycle for a long time now. But in the non-stop line of history, it happened just a few seconds ago. Now, did you ever wonder, how could anyone be convinced that she was black at all? I mean, her facial features, that very slight tan, her manner, her personal effect, her speaking style. I mean, at the time, one of the numerous perspectives on the issue I heard was this.
Well, Ray, what difference does it make if someone wants to be black? Let them. You do want equality, don't you?
Reflecting on that for just a second now. Well, damn. From the source of all black knowledge, hidden away in a secret bunker high in the Blue Ridge Mountains, protected with full fields of fire and man-eating dogs. This is What's Ray Saying? I'm Ray Christian. Now, how is it that people who self-identify or are seen as members of the original peoples of Africa, black people, how come they come in such a wide range of skin complexions, hair texture, eye color, and facial features? How can they all be considered black in America? Well, two narratives to add just a little more complexity into the issue. Coming up after this.
Hello, story lovers. My name is Satori Shakur, and I'm the founder, curator, and producer for the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers, a nonprofit 501c3 out of Detroit, Michigan. Our mission is global: to connect humanity, heal and transform community, and to provide an uplifting, thought-provoking, soul-cleansing entertainment experience through the art and craft of storytelling. Our goal is to transform community through the arts, one story at a time. Last year, Ray Christian drove all the way from Boone County, North Carolina, to take our stage here in Detroit, and he lifted that audience up off their feet in applause. He is a profound, prolific, jaw-dropping storyteller, and I'm so proud because he's coming out with his own podcast, What Ray's Saying. So I'm here to encourage everybody all over the world to listen to What Ray's Saying and be taken away by his amazing, delightful, tragic, heart-wrenching, heart-throbbing stories. Thank you very much.
The most common experience, not the exception for most black women and girls, from the very beginning of the transatlantic slave trade until the evolution of the peculiar institution of American slavery, black women were compelled to have sex with any white man on order, by force, by fear, and by custom until well after the end of slavery and into the 1900s. These assaults were never considered rape by law because, only a woman with honor and dignity could be raped, such as a white woman of any social status. A black woman? Never. It was a common practice for slave owners to have sex with slave women, as well as other white males on the plantations. Black girls as young as 12, married or unmarried, were impregnated by white men by the thousands. They and their children were most often dismissed as simply property of the plantation and little more. This was the rule, not the exception. As these sexual encounters increased with each generation of black women, so did the lightened appearance of slaves. Southern intellectuals and slave-owning apologists attempted to define the racial makeup of slaves by using pseudoscience or non-science terms like octoroon for 1/8, quadroon for 1/4, mulatto for 1/2. But the most fundamental part of this theory of race is the one-drop rule, you see, because white people were deemed to be pure as a race, as much as a single drop of black blood makes you black, no matter what your appearance is. In time, this classification system became so unmanageable in practice or legal meaning that all light-skinned blacks were simply called and identified as mulatto. Some white wives beat and abused favored girls and their children, often insisting that they be sent away. The behavior of white men, slave and non-slave owner, often explained this behavior on the black woman's sex drive, the need to calm the black woman down, put the black man in his place, youthful indiscretions, a birthright, boyhood traditions, a harmless sin against the self, or at its worst, the petty misuse of someone else's property. Anything, but never a crime. On most plantations, light-skinned black females were praised as a luxury because their stereotype and view of light-skinned black females was of being more attractive, physical weakness, but highly intelligent. These traits, they favored them in some ways during slavery. It got them out of most hard field work, but confined many to work in and around the master's home. Light-skinned slaves were favored as sex partners, but they and their children, who often looked very close to being white and almost close enough to pass, almost. But what had been a small advantage in the days before the Civil War, now in the aftermath and at the end of slavery, being light-skinned was initially a curse. As some former slaves who were angry at those they felt at one time had an advantage met them with some jealousy, and at the same time, the object of desire. When work was hard to find, most whites preferred a darker-skinned black to do labor and were often suspicious of light-skinned blacks, especially poor whites. In response to widespread assaults and Jim Crow laws limiting the social activities of blacks regardless of their financial abilities, some multiracial and light-skinned blacks tried to demonstrate that they were in fact different from the full black and should be treated differently. Often they reinforced stereotypes in their writings and descriptions of dark-skinned blacks, but the idea of being treated differently by Southern white America failed completely. Now, while they could never be equal or near equal to whites, these light-skinned blacks, they could be leaders within the black race, being the most intelligent, most capable, appearing more white. Many progressive white philanthropists and social activists found lighter-skinned blacks to be more moral, more hygienic, and suitable examples for the entire black race. Some forward-looking whites and black thinkers of the early 20th century saw the need to build a class of black leaders through education, a more educated black population, more learned about the world. They were the ones that were needed to come forth, that talented 10%. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the founders of the NAACP, noted black author, scholar, and teacher, in his list of the top 100 black men in America, all but one, Booker T. Washington, was a mulatto. Blacks as represented in the media, such as in films, print publications, most often represented light-skinned blacks as the object of affection and darker-skinned as stereotypical, buffoonish, and unattractive. A number of light-skinned blacks who saw themselves as upwardly mobile found it in their interest to maintain relationships with others who looked as they did as a social advantage. Early elite black boarding schools and voluntary social organizations such as fraternities and sororities often use complexion as an entry criteria into their organizations and social functions to set them apart from the underclass of black life. There was the brown paper bag test. If you were darker than the bag, you can't come in. The comb test. If you cannot pass a fine-tooth comb through your hair without stopping, you can't come in. The rare exception, money. A black person who was dark-skinned with wealth could purchase some degree of social whiteness. An entire industry of cosmetics and fashions were developed to help darker-skinned women attempt to look whiter and constantly promote the idea that white was better. The ideal measure of beauty and attractiveness, from advice about staying out of the sun to the widespread use of bleaching creams, nose pinching. Non-straight or curly hair was typically called bad hair. Light-skinned blacks called high yellow and red bones were always represented as the most attractive. The birth of black pride and African heritage as a source of pride and as a movement heightened the amount of pride and the reality for a generation that black people who were not light-skinned, who were darker, were just as beautiful and attractive. But despite this effort and the adoption of this idea that black is beautiful by millions of blacks, the default light-skinned, beautiful black still existed. And as it was in the past, and is still, it's a source of tension, jealousy, mistrust, and admiration. Rachel Dolezal, she didn't get plastic surgery to get a wider nose or wider lips or go really dark. She went with the easy, to pretend to be one of the privileged and most admired of the black race, historically, socially, and culturally.
What up, though? This is B's Gordy Brooks coming to you live from the planet Detroit. And we rocking live now with my man Ray. What's Ray saying? Ray saying a whole lot. And I'm the beat conductor that's going to be giving you the music in the background as Ray portrays his wonderful stories to the world. Oh, by the way, be on the lookout for that new album, From Nothing to Something, straight out of E-Course, coming to you soon by B's Gordy Brooks. Now, what's Ray saying? He about to say.
A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to be introduced to a man that would challenge everything I ever thought I knew about the dynamics of being black. One of my friends had told me one day, hey man, you got to meet this brother. They call him Redbone. Now I'd heard the name Redbone used before, but usually was a reference to a real light-skinned white black girl. Never heard it often used in reference to a guy, once in a while. So I just took it to mean that he was going to be a light-skinned guy. When we went to his house, knocked on the door, the guy opens the door, and what I'm looking at is a 5'7", 150-pound, extremely pale white, light brown-haired, thin waspy nose, light green eyes, atypical white man. White in every visible way. Not a hint of ethnicity in him at all. And I had met many black men who looked nearly white. Curly hair, straight hair, light green eyes. I even met a few with blue eyes. And I'd met white men who imitated black people, mostly in the most insulting or stereotypical way. And on a rare occasion, I'd meet a white guy that had a kind of generic accent that could be black or white. But I had never saw what appeared to me as an atypical white man, especially a southern white man, speak like him. After we came in and I sat down and he started to talk, it occurred to me that if I closed my eyes, what was in front of me was the voice of a southern black man, moderate education, hard, kind of new to the city words, but you could hear them country metaphors and analogies slipping in there from time to time. So, in talking to him, this was his story. Now, he was raised as the second of 5 children of a black family and somewhere in rural North Carolina. Now, his true mother and father, they were in fact white, and they were very young when he was born. In fact, his mother was about 16 when she had him, father about 18. Seems that they ran away from home, got married, didn't have any money, no resources, uneducated, desperately poor, and along with a few other similarly situated poor white folks, they found themselves eventually worked alongside mostly poor blacks cropping tobaccos in the fields all day on a tenant farm. They were lucky enough to find a room in a small, 3-room shack that had been rented by a black couple. And they had already had a young baby that was about 5 months old. Now, subleasing was absolutely not allowed, so they had to kind of live on the low, and which meant that during the daytime they really couldn't be at the house at all, on that off chance that the owner would happen to come by. I think they knew some of this was happening, but at any rate, it wasn't the kind of life other than the place to lay down that they was living at. But so it meant that the whole family, they were all going to be close together. And they lived pretty tight. So they kind of made an agreement that the man's wife would keep the baby, and also that she would wet nurse the baby so that she didn't have to come back from the field to breastfeed. And this was not uncommon in that place in that time, but certainly not something sophisticated people were still doing. So about 4 weeks after she actually gave her birth to her new baby, she really returned back to work in the field. And they needed that money. Because the deal was that they would get to stay there if they helped a little bit of money with the rent and kind of help with the food and stuff like that, but not much else. Early one morning it was kind of foggy and misty, and the white couple was looking at each other halfway across the road, and they was trying to meet up. And at the time as they kind of crossed the highway to kind of meet each other, at the same time they didn't see this old heavy log truck going screaming down the road. And they were both struck as they had walked halfway across the road and hit and thrown down the highway, run over. They were killed. Now the white couple killed. The black family still had that baby. They had no idea who that couple's real family was. They didn't even know for sure where they came from. They didn't have any papers. Had to bury them in a pauper's grave. And without really any formality at all, no court papers, no judge, no anything, they just kept the baby. They raised the baby, they gave them the baby their last name, and of course over time the couple would have 3 more children. All the kids the family called the baby, oh now the boy, Redbone. So he would grow up and live, eat, socialize just like they did. He was family. He really didn't have that much contact with whites. And I remember that whenever he got drunk, there were certain stories that he would express a lot, or he would recount over and over again. One of the ones that he repeated most typically was the one about being at a local general store and that he was told he was not allowed in there because he lived with those niggas. That he was a white nigga. When he was upbeat, he would often talk about how he and his brother, they kind of adopted their styles based on upscale city life. They wore big flashy suits with wide brim hats and suspenders, you know. They were brothers. They looked like twins, except for one was white and one was black. And he talked about all the jealousy that kind of provoked. Uppity nigga, crazy white boy. He would become more morose sometimes when he drank, and he would recall being beat up by gangs of white boys for being a nigger, and the irony of being beat up by a group of black boys for being white. He had lived that experience more than once. In listening to him speak on a variety of subjects, I would have to describe him in this way. If I were a blind man, I would think, this is an angry, white-hating black man. The most angry, drunken, outrageously upset black man I had ever met. Now, he had felt betrayed by whites, overlooked by whites, insulted by whites. He saw his family humiliated by whites. And the irony of having to defend his blackness countless times. I lost count of the number of times that he'd angered and confused blacks and whites equally when he'd get drunk and start these racist rants. Niggas, crackers this, white people this, niggas that. He must have been punched in the nose and had his ass whooped by blacks and whites equally. His long dialogues about the evils of the white race and what white people were capable of were extreme in the most. But I was left wondering. He was white, wasn't he? And what does it mean to be black? What does it imply? And what was red bone? Well, friends, this one is done. Thanks for stopping by. Be sure to tell your friends, share, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions on this episode or future shows, just drop us a line. This show is produced by me, Ray Christian, with help from Dr. T. Special thanks this week to Satori Shakur. Original music, beats, and cameo by the always amazing Beach Gordy Brooks.
You have been listening to What's Ray Saying, the podcast, hosted by Ray Christian. You can find What's Ray Saying on iTunes, Facebook, and Twitter. If you've got comments, questions, or feedback, you can always reach us via Facebook or by emailing whatsraysaying@gmail.com. Ray says each episode is made with love, fatback, chicken feed, and fresh mountain spring water, but none of these are legal tender according to the electric company. To help this listener-supported podcast pay the bills and keep producing episodes like the one you just heard, you can click on our Donate tab on Facebook or go to paypal.me/whatsraysaying. Tell a friend or 2 or 12 or 20 what you just heard on What's Ray Saying, the podcast. Until next time.